Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for this live stream event. Before we begin, I'd like to review two items, our code of conduct and our event guidelines. So first off, our code of conduct. Microsoft Reactor seeks to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and our presenters. We encourage engagement in the chat. We just ask that you're mindful and professional, remaining on topic. This session obviously is streaming to YouTube, so it is being recorded and will be available for on-demand access at the conclusion of the session. So if you need to circle back, reference anything, it will be available. If you've not been on a YouTube live stream before, you do need to have an account set up to interact in the chat. That is where you can ask us questions, drop comments, so on and so forth. So if you have not created an account yet on YouTube, I would highly recommend doing so now. Which brings us to today's session. So this is a two-part series. The first session was last week. It was more of an introduction to everything Bicep. This week is Bicep by example. So we're going to get into the thick of it. Let me pull up our speaker. Just one second. Hello, Stephane. Thank you for joining us. So this is Stephane Lapointe. He's a principal cloud architect, and he will be running us through today's session. I'll let you take it from here.
Yes, thank you, Rebecca. So, hi, my name is Stephane Lapointe. I'm a principal cloud architect at GSoft. I'm also a Microsoft Azure MVP, and I'm part of a selected few people, lucky people, I can say, that contribute and is close to the Bicep project for Azure. So I'm a community core maintainer with the Bicep team. And this is my Twitter, S_Lapointe, and my LinkedIn. So if you have any question for what's in this session or regarding, let's say, Bicep, the repo for Bicep is there. You can open issues, etc. But if you have any question, you want to reach to me directly, those are my information, and your I'll be glad to answer your questions. So if we proceed, so like we said, we already had a session last week regarding why infrastructure as code is important. Why is Bicep a differentiator in the Azure space? So there's plenty of other tools. So all of these are already been talked in the previous session. So if you want to take, so I won't go over again in deep for infrastructure as code. Why is it important? We can see here that since we define and declare what the intent that we have for an infrastructure, it's repeatable. It forces us to think about what we will be doing and how we want it. So the introspection, it forces us to do that. Since it's declaring a file, it's pretty much self-documented. It can serve audits. So if you need to comply to standards and have audits, let's say for SOC 2, you want to be ISO 27001. So these can serve audits, and also versioning if you so since you'll be using source control, most likely, and if not, I invite you to do it, because this is one of the main advantage of the whole process of DevOps and reviewing, doing peer review, etc. So versioning is also a big advantage here. So again, not going into too deep for this. It was talked a little bit more on last week. The link is there on YouTube. You can watch the previous session. So why Bicep? So again, I'll stay a little bit high on this, but just a quick review. There's a ton of tools that can help with infrastructure as code today for Azure. There are tools that do multiple cloud providers, let's say like Terraform, but these comes with pros and cons. Sorry. A little bit like Bicep. It's not the perfect tool. It's a tool I really like, but it's still a tool that is evolving, but it's getting better and better, especially now we are approaching the version 1.0. We're still not there yet, but there's a lot of that has been done into Bicep. So advantages, it's simpler than learning ARM templates. It is an abstraction over ARM templates. It's a domain language by itself, so it is its own language, but the syntax is simpler. It's way easier to learn for teams and for yourself, so more concise. We have an improved dev experience with Bicep. Let's say when you're using VS Code, you'll see in a minute also as we go over and go on with the session, there's plenty of tips and tricks, and the linter is what will give you hints about what you're doing in Bicep and maybe how to hide certain message or warning or change the importance of those issues. So maybe right now it's a warning and you want to erase that completely. You don't want to be bothered with this, or you want to be an information message instead of warning, or maybe you want it to be an error in the display and in the process for your team. So really you can play with that with Bicep. There's no state. I was talking about Terraform and maybe with other tools. Azure is a multi-billion state machine, so they are hosting your resources. They know exactly how your resources are configured because they are the cloud provider after all. So there's no state that you need to keep in Bicep in sync, etc., compared to other tools. And the API version from the resource provider, which let's say will let you request and manipulate, let's say, things like computers, VMs, databases, websites, etc. So those are who owns your resources in Azure. Those are resource providers, and everything that is available is available day one. As soon as they release a new API version, you have access to that in Bicep. So we'll see. I promised you something that is a lot quicker, and we'll do just that. So let's dive in. No big talk today. And I don't know exactly the amount of people connected right now to the stream, but we can make that a little bit more maybe interactive than last week. I was presenting a lot of content, presenting slides, etc. This week it's going to be mainly hands-on. So as soon as we go, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'll keep an eye on the comments, and yeah, we'll take it from there. So if I minimize this, I'm in Visual Studio Code. Things should be big enough, but if there's anything at all and you're unable to see, right, let us know and we'll adjust, but I think this should be good. Okay, so in Bicep, we usually the default file name you will use with Bicep is called main.bicep, but you could call it anything you want. There's a few. I'll just go quickly over what you could find in a Bicep file. First, there are parameters. So those you can be seen as here. Those are declared with the keyword param. So parameters and variables enable us to play with values and inputs. You could transform them. You could pass them to several functions available in ARM templates. Everything that is available in ARM templates are is available in Bicep also. There's a way to do things maybe a little bit better in Bicep than calling plain and simple the arm functions, but you'll see that at least everything is compatible and you could use them. It's just a way to so it's sometimes simpler to do that in Bicep. So coming back to parameters, so parameters are inputs to your template, and basically when we create the deployment on Azure, you will be able to provide values for those inputs. So in this template, I have 3 parameters actually. So I have environment code, which is a string, and there's a few types that you could have. So array is an array, it's an array. So the objects inside the array could be, let's say, all strings, objects, int, boolean, etc. But it defines that there will be 0 to many items for that parameters. So I have a string, which is the environment code. You could see that I have also a decorator for that parameter. So I'm saying that the only allowed values I want for this parameter are the one in this array. So I only let dev, QA, stage, and prod for these parameters. I could also provide default values if I want. So I don't have to, if there's a default value, I don't have to provide the value at the time of deployment. So either by using a parameter file, or let's say when I'm deploying, one of the things I could do, let's say if you take a look at below, I'm doing an AZ deployment group create, the resource group I'm deploying to, the template file I'm using, so my Bicep file, but I could also do parameters, and after that saying environment code full dev, for example. So I could do something like that and have multiple parameters. If I don't do that, you'll see that, let me just erase this. If I don't do that, since environment code doesn't have a default value, I will be forced to provide a value if I'm not providing it at the prompt or using a parameter file. So I touched briefly parameter file last week. It's a way to have different values for your template. Let's say it could be different per environment. Let's say in dev, QA, staging, you might want different values for, it could be maybe namings, it could be tags, it could be the size of your instances, the amount of instance you want. You might want a more complicated configuration, let's say for production versus all your other dev environments. So inputs and parameters, could help in that regard. What I'll do is, as you can see, to invoke my deployment for this parameters, and I will dig into what's in this file after that. You see, again, I'm using AZ deployment group. So I could have AZ deployment sub, I could have AZ deployment MG for management group, or tenant if I would be deploying at the tenant level. So there's 4 scopes you could use, and we'll see when we get to governance as code. I will give you an example of deploying at tenant level and management group level, but basically it's just the scope you're targeting your deployment to for Azure. So if I press enter on this, it will launch the deployment. And when the deployment is launched, you see I didn't provide any value for environment code, and it's using the allowed values I have to prompt me to know, okay, what environment do I want to deploy? So I will do one for dev, and the template will deploy it will deploy the template using the environment called dev. I have a question. Is there a validate only CLI option or a what if? Yes. So let me get back to that question, Corey. I'll let the deployment finish, but instead of doing AZ deployment, instead of doing AZ deployment group create, I could do an AZ deployment what if, AZ deployment group what if, and what it will do is go to Azure. It will send the deployment to Azure, and Azure will check what is asked in this deployment. What is the difference between what is there presently, and so it will do a diff of. So if I do that, it should give me, okay, and I will say for the same dev environment, I didn't change anything. So probably it will, this is a work in progress with what if. So the resource provider have to do a lot of cleanups because they are returning a lot of runtime properties, and it's a work in progress to keep things very clean, if you want. But you could see that those are properties that are added by default. My SKU capacity would go from 0 to 1 because right now probably I didn't deploy anything at all. The website is not running, and the capacity is scaled back to 0, and it will be brought to 1, etc. But if I was to, let's say, change something else, maybe capacity, but you see that the even if I change it, you can see with plus and tile, you can see those that change properties that are added, etc. So you could see the chart here. If for any reason you're not satisfied with how what if answer you and show you the information, you can open issues in the proper place in GitHub. I will provide a link later on after the session if you want, but you could open issues on GitHub to say, hey, I'm saying this, and this, for me, this is noise, and the teams at Microsoft will examine that and clean more and more as far as you go. So last week we shared a free Bicep Learn module. If you haven't, okay, so this is from Microsoft Reactor. Yeah, okay, perfect. So we've seen params. The other things that we will have in our Bicep file is variables. So variables could be static. Static means if I'm doing test equal test, that value will never change. So this is a static variable. If I'm doing things like, and this is something we can do. So I have a config file here, a JSON file in here, in config.json. If I open this, it's a JSON file containing a project, which is defined to project1, and a bunch of tags, owner and their value, department, etc. So what I can do in Bicep is load the content of that file, which will be just text, and convert that to a JSON object and use that and put that into my config variable. So what I could do after is, let's say I'm building a naming suffix and using the Unix string. I touched that last week, but Unix string, you can pass it one or many parameters, and it, in a deterministic way, it will always return a hash of 13 character. So deployment after deployment, if the inputs are always of the same value, I will always have the same hash as a response. So this is the meaning of deterministic. It will based on the same input, it will always be the same output. So, but I can use the config file I loaded from disk and do config dot, and I could explore project name, tags. I have IntelliSense on this, department and owner. So I would just revert that to what it was, config project name. But what it allows me to do is load this config and for any reason, build other config or other part of this config. Let's say this one, it's the same. Let's say, if I go back here, it's the same kind of schema. There's no schema in JSON for this file, but you can see it's the main thinking. So my main object, I'm not touching project name, but I'm adding a node name tags in this, and I'm adding a field that is not in my config JSON. And what I could do is combine them together, config and config overrides. So I could eventually have base configuration on file that is in my source control, and eventually at runtime change some information because of the input in parameters, because of computed operation I did, let's say with ARM functions. But I could combine those two objects together, and you will see the outcome at the end that computed will have an extra tag environment and environment code with the value of what I'm passing to environment code. So those I use that often, let's say with Bicep, where I have a config file on the disk. I load it with JSON, load text context and JSON, do some transformation a little bit, union configuration object together, and from there I continue my deployment, pass a subset or the whole config object to modules. We could do that also. So what we are doing here with variables, naming suffix, naming prefix, those are for naming convention. I'm doing string interpolation here. So between single quotes, I have a $sign and this character. So I'm doing the curly brace around. It could be a variable, it could be a parameter, it could be, let's say, app insight. I have a resource there. I could do app insights component dot. I could do dot something properties, etc. The only things you need to be careful, but if you want to reference modules and things like that, is that you need to make sure that the resource is deployed before your that the dependency that ARM will calculate around all this. That is very explicit, because otherwise they will try to resolve what's for your naming, and it might not be available at that time. So, but anything else like inputs and other variables, you could use with variables and string interpolation. So naming prefix, suffix, I'm building after that. I'm reusing the prefix and suffix for my naming convention in this file. What I could do also is using ternary operator. So if I wanna, depending on the condition, so if the environment code is prod, this is where the ternary options operator is. So the question mark. And after that, I'm saying if the environment code equal prod, I want this queue to be P1, V3. Everything else, I want it to be the freeze queue, so F1. So if I'm passing prod2 as the environment code, I'm going to end up with P1, V3. Otherwise, it's going to be F1 for my queue. This is... so I have a question. So our resource depends calculated automatically with Bicep. Yeah, no arm depends on exactly. So there might be. It's an excellent question, Corey. So usually with ARM templates, you needed to even if the dependency was kind of very explicit, for example, or for you it was an evidence, but you still needed to declare that dependency even from parent to child objects. In Bicep, as soon as you reference, let's say, and I'm doing this, and I'll show you. So if you're referencing, let's say, app insights component later on in the template or as the input of a module, what Bicep is doing automatically for you during the transpiled phase is using the reference function to build up that dependency automatically for you. So the dependencies in Bicep, unless you're doing let's say 2 modules, and you are not referencing the output of one modules for the others, but you still want a certain order, this is where you will explicitly, let's say, do depends on, and let's see the name of your app service plan. This is not a module, but you could still do that in Bicep. But usually you don't have to, because ARM will know that ARM by default will try to deploy everything in parallel as possible, and it's building a dependency graph as you go at runtime. But yeah, you're right. In Bicep, you don't have to declare explicitly those dependencies. It is discovered and resolved implicitly, and you don't have to do that. That's an excellent question, Kari. Okay, so we've seen ternary operators. I could also say, hey, this resource, I'm deploying it. Okay, and this is where we get to the resource part. We've seen parameters, variables. So resources are the resources you want to deploy in Azure, and it requires the resource keyword in here. And after that, it's a key name for that resource. So let's say throughout all the other elsewhere in this template or in a module as input for a module, I can reference this resource now using the name I'm giving it here. So for every resource in Azure, we need a type. So this one is Microsoft.insights/components. So this one is an app insight resource. And we also have the with an API version. So different resource provider exposes different API versions. If you're starting something new, use the latest one. But if you need, for any reason, to stay compatible with an API version in particular, you could select them from here. And the properties that will be maybe required in the property bag might not be the same depending on the API version that you see there. Okay, so this is for a resource. So this is what I will refer that resource within my template, my Bicep file. I have to give it a name. So the name of my resource in Azure, a location. So location, we can see that this point to a parameters, and the parameters, this one is hard-coded. But I have another parameter for the location here, which use the location of the resource group the deployment is deployed in. So I have another question. In playing with Bicep, I'm not always certain when something should be a var or param. Both can have static values. Is there a rule of thumbs? That's a good question. Usually, if you want to have control over, if the value could change and you don't know all the possibilities in advance, for sure, a parameters is a really good candidate for this. The idea is not to have also 64 parameters in there. This is why I usually have a few parameters, but I also play with config files. So let's say from a dev environment to a QA environment, I want to change the size, the number of instances, maybe the subnet IPs I'm playing with. This is the kind of information, instead of having a lot of variables in my template, I could put that back, let's say, in configuration files and load them to the correct environments, let's say. So this is one candidate, but usually when the information is to change a lot or be very dynamic, I prefer params. Variable for me is more when I'm computing things and let's say playing with naming convention, I'm defining names, etc., etc. This is where I will use variables. Yeah, so this is a little bit my rule of thumb for me. Let me know if that answers your question, if it's clear enough for you. Okay, so I have this resource component, and what I could do is the way it is right now, it will always deploy. If I want to be conditional on this, I could say if, and I could use something in here. I won't deploy using that condition, but I could say a little bit like I had with my ternary operator here. I could say if environment equal prod, deploy this resource. Otherwise, it won't. ARM will just skip the deployment of that resource, and it won't be in the graph of the resource deployed. So I could do things like this also. If I want to have a bunch of resources deployed conditionally, you need to repeat that condition. At the moment, you need to repeat that condition to every resources. That there's no kind of grouping for this logical deployment group, and this is not existent at the moment for Bicep. But still, you can control what is deployed or not. So you could see that I was saying that the computed config is the result of those two parameters. The whole object, project name and tags, is merged with this, and with the union. When I deployed this, those resources and use the computed config object variable, now they will have, I will just deploy it. It was already deployed. So let's go and see project one. Let's see. I should have an essential here. Growth department, environment dev. You could see that the variable have been merged together, and this information is now part of my deployment. Okay, so and we could again reference other resources. In this web application, I'm referencing the app insight component, which was my app insight. I'm doing dot properties and instrumentation key. So I'm creating an app settings for this web application, and this is the key of the app settings. The key of the name of the key of the app settings, and the value I'm taking the instrumentation key of another deployed resource and injecting it in this in the deployment. What we could have also is outputs. So outputs can help you. Let's say if you're doing parent and child deployments, you could take the output of a deployment or module and reuse it for the rest of your deployment. So since maybe another template, if I'm building an enterprise library of multiple templates and we have a repository, we will touch briefly the ACR. So if I want to have modules in public libraries, I could deploy them for my organization, and the way they are built, they might not be aware of what was the connection string or the instrumentation key for my app inside. So you could use outputs to get out information of a certain module and or deployment, and we use that to do something else. Let's say because you're using Azure CLI, Azure PowerShell, or it's because there's a template within a template and a sub deployment like that. You could pass that information along. So this one, again, an output, the name of the output, the type, and the value of it. If I go to my deployment in Azure, let's see, I'm going to home. I have my deployments here. If I go back to the main deployment and I check output, okay, this is, I have something here. And you could say that the connection string is an output of my deployment. Okay. So I will accelerate a bit because we have plenty of content to do. What we could do also is loop. So if I have, let's say, I have a storage account count in here with the value 2 as a parameter, what I could do is loop over a range of items. You could see for the first example, for this variable, I have an item count of 3. So I could do a for I in range of 0 to 3. And what it will do is that it will build an array of string with the value item 1, item 2, item 3, item 1, 2, 3 for this. So, and 4 because we're starting at 0. So this is one way to build. In ARM templates, you have the copy operator that will that enable you to loop and simplify a little bit the kind of looping of resources and variable and properties. What I could do also is I have here an array of 2 subnets. I could say that for this virtual networks, instead of always copying the resource in there, I could loop for subnet in subnet. So this is a key I'm defining for the array I have. And from here, it will loop, and I can use, let's say, name with the subnet.name, which is a property I have here and here. And same thing for subnet prefixes. So there's a way to make your template more concise. Instead of repeating all those resources, and let's say I have 3 blocks for storage accounts, you can see that I have for I, again, in range of 0 to storage count. Storage count was a parameter I have. So the value can come from a parameter, it could come from a variable, same thing. So it will do 0 to 2, and I could use I, which is the index of the current iteration. I can use I storage and then a unique string I'm building. So, but using just one declaration, I can declare multiple storage accounts if you want. This is something you could do. Again, same thing for the output. I could use a for and looping to return multiple objects. So what I'll do is let me deploy loops. And you'll see as I go to the other one, the loop dictionary, it's the same concept, but instead of using arrays, we will use dictionaries. So this is an object in Bicep, but you have a key, semicolon, and then the object that goes with it. So this is a way to represent a dictionary with key and value. And again, I can loop through this and say I have one network security groups. I want to deploy network security groups, and for each NSG in items, and this is the magic function that will convert. If they are in this format, they will convert a dictionary into an array. And after that, I'm able to do nsg.value.name, because this will be the key and this will be the value. So if I'm doing nsg.value.name, I'm referring to this. And if I'm doing .location, I'm referring to this and this. If I wanted to use the key, I would have used key in here. So if I'm doing there, I'm going to deploy the deployment loop in there. If I go to my deployment on my, you can see my loop deployment succeeded. If I go check the output, let me just hide that. This is the information returned. And if I'm going to show you, you can see that I have returned 2 objects, and these were exactly what was in here. So because I said range 0 to storage account, which was 2, I have 2 object return, and these are the 2 I created in there. So it's a way to make things more compact. You could use loop and build more complex objects as you go with Bicep. Okay, these are for one of the things I didn't mention a little bit is modules. So what I could do with modules is take all the logic I want and put that into a file that I will be reusing. So module, instead of having a resource to keyword, I will use module. This is the identifier I will use throughout my my Bicep file. So you can see that this Bicep module is referenced here as the input to another module. So basically, I'm taking a module that is on file right now on the file system, and I have a name, which is test bicep deploy. So it's the name is for the deployment. Basically, it's what you will see in here. This is the name of your deployment when you're giving a name to a module. And you can add parameters to it. So you could see I have 2 parameters, 1 parameter, sorry, and I'm just app service 1 and 2. So I have more than one. Sorry, I have the location, SKU capacity, and SKU name, but I could just pass what I need in there. So so this is a way to enforce reusability. And you can see that now I'm referencing a Bicep file, but I could also do that to a JSON file, an ARM template file. So you don't have to translate every ARM templates you already have today. It could be an ongoing process. And you could reuse your existing ARM templates and migrate them as you go. And is that ESLint like declaration part of the? Yes, this here is because I was saying one of the advantages in VS Code is that you have linting. And if I remove that line, you can see that Bicep is saying, hey, the parameter location of module isn't assigned to an explicit value within the module. And this is something for this demo I'm able to live with, but I have the option to edit what is the level for that rule. Let's say if I go in there, the level by default is warning. I could say turn that off completely for the whole project, error info warning. So I'll keep that as warning, but this is something, if you want to have a bicep config file.json in your project, the whole team you're working with will be able to go by the same rules that you define in there. So this is, it is for it is only in the Bicep exception, the Bicep rule the things, but the things when you're playing with the Bicep executable, it will raise those concerns. After that, whenever you decide it's an error or a warning, that could potentially stop your, it will change how you have error and warnings at the command line also. So you need to be aware of this. But before changing that, let's say to an error. But for this example, I'm just suppressing using that line here. Okay, time is really flying. So again, deploying module, if I'm deploying those two modules, not a big, so I'm deploying, let's say this one. Basically, it's the same thing as deploying a main.bicep. We're just referencing external files that will be built inside that file when transpile. So if I transpile this and do build bicep file, the JSON resulting of this is multiple deployment, 2 deployments with the template injected in it. So at the end, I just have one big template with the 2 files being injected in it. I'm removing that. Okay. One other thing I want to show you is I showed you that you could, let's say, do load text content. In this example, I won't deploy this one, but what I could do is, let's say I'm loading a lot of JSON file, a big JSON that is kind of static, but let's say I want to replace this value here. I want to replace, this is an hard-coded, let's say, resource ID. What I could do is go in there, put a replacement token, let's say to, what I decided it's curly brace workspace resource ID. I could save my file, go back to my main.bicep, but instead of loading the whole file and leave it that way to be injected into the serialized data, what I could do is do a replace of the same load text content and replace the token I gave, and then reuse. This is a pointer to the log analytics I have here, this one. So I'm saying log analytics.id. So instead of having the value hard-coded in my JSON file, I'm doing a replacement of the text loaded and injecting the log analytic resource ID from my deployment. So this is something you could do also with Bicep pretty easily. And just a side note though, when you do load text content, for as the moment the limit is 4 meg for the file you're loading, and the size of your so for the size of your what will be injected. So just be careful about that. What I could do, I was talking about governance as code. What you could do here, up until now, we always deployed at the resource group level. Now with this one, what we could do is deploy, let's say, at the tenant level. What that means is that I'm at the Azure AD tenant level, and this is the highest level possible. And what I could do is from there, I can create a management group. So that means if you want to create management group, subscriptions, and kind of do your governance as code, even policy, we will touch policy, you could do that also. So I'm positioning myself at the tenant level, and I'm deploying a new management group. And from there, and this is a current limitation, if I want to deploy anything at that management group level, I need to go and use a module to deploy at that scope at the moment. So this is a little things that you need to do. It's not a big deal, but you will put the rest of your deployment for that management group inside a module. So it's just another Bicep file on the side. What I'm doing in there, again, I don't want to go in too deep into what is a policy definition, what is a policy assignment for Azure, but again, there's two ways to do that. Define the policy, the Azure policy in Bicep. So you have your policy rules, if not, etc. This is the logic I have. But what you could do also is have those policy defined in a JSON file. So basically what you're doing in the portal, etc., you could keep the same JSON format as is and load the text of this and just refer to the properties block that will be passed to the properties of the policy definition. So this is a very neat way to do infrastructure as code. You can take whatever existing policy you have in Azure and maybe just change a few things in there and save it on this, load it from this, deploy that from a JSON file, and boom, you just have 3 lines of code and you're deploying a policy definition. So same thing, but completely in the Bicep file. If I want to do there my policy assignment, I could reuse the policy definition. I'm just referring to the policy above. So this one.id. And if I'm deploying all this, so from this and from the Bicep file itself, let's say I'm doing this. Again, I'm going to deploy, but this time easy deployment tenant instead of group create. For sure, I think you understand that you need to have the proper rights to deploy at the tenant level, or at least if it's an Azure DevOps pipeline, etc., they need the identity of the pipeline need to have access, the service connection need to have access to at this scope for sure. Okay, so this is deploying. Another things I want to touch briefly is now I've been referring modules that is in the same, let's say, source control that I have, or it could be elsewhere on the disk, but it's physically on my disk. I touched that briefly in the previous session, but I could have an Azure Container Registry deployed, and it's an Azure Container Registry. I could deploy that and start publishing my enterprise modules to it, and then refer those. So this was I'll just do that just to be double sure, because I think I maybe deleted it. But I'm deploying that ACR, Azure Container Registry. And what I could do after that is publish modules to it. And it wasn't maybe not deployed because it's taking a little bit longer than I thought. So, but yeah, the idea is I'll be able to deploy this, publish a module to it, and then reference it using the same module with my key identifier here. But for the path, let's say I'll be publishing the same app services Bicep module. So let's say I'm here, and I'll publish my module. So AZ Bicep publish, and the file I want to publish. The target is BR for Bicep registry, and the name of my ACR, and the path I want to give to this module being published. So I will be publishing this, and consuming it is very simple after that. I'm just going, let's say, to a new empty Bicep file. I just build a reference to it. Let's say module, external module. Again, BR, semicolon, the full path reference to it. And what you don't see, because it's pretty quick, is that Bicep in Visual Studio Code, but not just in Visual Studio Code, but Bicep will download the file if you have the permission to and access to the file. It will download it to your local cache, and then it will be working from that cache. So if I go, let's say, and I open my cache folder, you'll see that I have a folder for ACR here, and I have Azure COE App Service, the one I just published. This is from here. There's way, if let's say you don't override your tag here, and you publish over it, and you need to refresh kind of your token. I'm kind of proud of this because I did it myself. But you now have the option to right click and restore Bicep a Bicep file. So the module for a specific file. So all the module used in that file will be deleted from the cache and forced to be re-downloaded. So this is this was not a good example because I don't have the same thing in it, but you get the point that I have a reference here. Required, I'm just to give it a name of test. So I'm trying to go too fast. The capacity one, and let's say F1 for, and you could see the when I'm saying the allowed values I have for this module, they are given to me here, and I'm able to get that into the sense. So if I go there and say force Bicep, you can see, whoops, the directory has just been deleted and downloaded again because I forced through this. So one of the things, because there's 4 minutes left and I want just to touch this, you can do a lot in Bicep and ARM templates, but sometimes you cannot do exactly what you want to do. Let's say you wanted to work with an external DNS provider, you want to work with an external CDN, you want to work with something, or maybe just create an app in Azure AD for any reason, and you want to play with Azure AD. Today, it is not yet there in Bicep because there are extensions that are coming. But still, there will always be things you can do in Bicep and in ARM in general. So what you can do with deployment script is, okay, let me just go there and remove that. Yes. Let's say that's what I could do is deploy this template, and I will just do that in a second. So this is a deployment, and what I'm doing in here is deploy. Again, you can use that in ARM templates and not just Bicep, but deployment script enables you to deploy Azure CLI script and AZ PowerShell script that will be run in an Azure, in an ECI container. And so you could do whatever you want in there, and you have access to Azure. In this example, I'm doing basically nothing. I'm just doing, this is a param for my PowerShell script and writing an output. And I'm just doing something special to return an output from this script. But you can see that I'm just receiving an input, doing some transformation, getting an output, and this can be, and one script can be, output can be reused throughout my templates, and I'm doing that with those two template scripts. So at the end, what it will be doing is, again, like I said, I'll just zoom out a little bit. If I refresh, you will probably see there, container instance that is created temporarily by Azure to run my script, and then the result will be available in the deployment, and I could take the output of that deployment script and reuse that throughout my deployment, or it could just end up that way. Would like to see more deployment script example at some point. That could be feasible. Like I said, the limit in deployment script is really your imagination. Everything that you can do in Bicep and in ARM in general, in ARM templates, you could leverage deployment script to do that yourself. The only thing I would point though, because I'm at the hour, is that deployment script tend to slow down your deployment, because you see that they need to create a container instance, run your script on it. So if you have multiple scripts running in if you have multiple deployment script, it could lengthen your deployment. So it's the only thing to keep in mind. But otherwise, it could bridge the gap very greatly with anything you need to do in Azure. So from there, I want to be conscious of your time. Same things as last time. Again, if you want to go through the advantages of infrastructure as code and Bicep more in detail, I invite you to go to my first presentation. I did a few minutes on this. Again, if you want to dive and learn, there's a great learning path in the Microsoft doc for to learn Bicep. This was just a brief overview. I tried to pick up a few interesting things, but there's a lot in there. So be sure to go check the learning path to continue on learning Bicep. Yeah. So again, my name is Stephane Lapointe. Just want to make sure that I switch to this one. So my name is Stephane Lapointe. You have my coordinates here. That's it for Twitter and LinkedIn. If you want to speak, debate, ask question regarding Bicep, github.com/azure/bicep. This is the address for the Bicep repository, but otherwise feel free to reach me and we can talk. So that's it for me. Thanks, folks.
Thank you so much, Stephane. This was great. And thanks to our audience once again for being very engaged on today's session. Really enjoyed the comments happening there. I'm going to pop up just one of them from Corey, just because it's so excited. You know, he really enjoyed everything that you were showcasing, Stephane. So happy for that. I dropped into the chat our survey request. Just going to pop that up on the screen for a second here. And so if you have the time, just feel free to submit this survey. We use it to kind of figure out who our audience is and develop content from that. And then just going to share one last slide. I imagine that most of you are already part of the Reactor, but if you're not, join our community. You can find us on Twitter. We are on Meetup. We have multiple locations around the world, so just pick a location closest to you. Our website is currently under development right now, so it doesn't have as much resources as it used to, but it should be back up and running soon, and then it'll have a much more interactive calendar where you can search by specific topics, which is probably a little bit easier than our Meetup page, and then our newsletter. So thank you again, Stephane. This was great. I look forward to having you back here with the Reactor again in the future. Thank you to our audience, and enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. Take care.